Well, everybody loves a picnic, right? Some of you have family reunions this summer that you are really looking forward to. Others of you have family reunions that you're probably not really looking forward to. After more than a year apart from each other, you are ready to see your family, and so you rent a pavilion, you play games, but mostly what you do is you eat, right? Everybody brings food for a giant picnic lunch. You sit down at picnic tables and you eat hamburgers. Yum. Hot dogs. I don't eat hot dogs. They're gross. Baked beans. Chips. Cookies. And homemade ice cream. And then there's fruit salad and potato salad and pasta salad and bean salad. And why all the salad at picnics? Ain't nobody trying to eat no salad at a picnic. How many of you guys like salads at picnics? You're weird. And then probably one of the weirdest things that people bring to a picnic, deviled eggs. It's a crazy concept to me, right? Because eating an egg and you're like, hey, let's just eat the egg yolk. Yuck. Ugh. But let's add some mayonnaise, some mustard, and some paprika. Yummy! Get in my belly, right? By the way, I don't know who decided that they were going to be called deviled eggs, but they are so good. Anybody love deviled eggs? Dude, I can eat those by the dozen and make myself sick. Anybody else can eat them that way? The problem is what they do to you afterwards. Whew. Today we look at the story of two picnics, lunches in the Bible. There's just one problem with these stories. Nobody brought food. There was a massive crowd, but there was no brownies and ice cream. There was no watermelon, no burgers, no fried chicken, and there was no sweet tea. You can tell these people weren't Texans. It's an epic story, and it's the only miracle that is found in all four Gospels. Jesus and his disciples were already pretty well known. Miracles were happening. People were being healed and delivered and set free. And so what happened is the crowds kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, eventually Jesus and his disciples needed to rest. And so they decided to get on a boat and go out in the middle of the lake. They were trying to find a quiet place to rest. But what happened was the crowds were watching their boat and they started running ahead. As they passed through each town, the people would say, "Look, there's Jesus. He's here. Come and see him." And the crowd grew each town that they passed. When Jesus landed and saw a huge crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. It was a big crowd. It was about 5,000 men. So there was probably 5,000 women as well, probably around 5,000 children. There could have been as many as 15,000 people at all. Now, that's about 64% of the entire population of Limestone County. It's slightly less than all of the population of Mexia, Groesbeck, Tig, and Wortham put together. How many of you guys know that's a lot of people that showed up to hear Jesus? But see, Jesus didn't see the crowd as an irritating interruption, but he saw them as needy people. He saw that they were like sheep without a shepherd, and so he began teaching them many things, and by the time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. They said, "This is a remote place, and it is already late." They essentially said, "Hey, listen, Jesus, that's good teaching and all, but you have said enough for now. It is time to shut it down for the evening." Can I just tell you, it takes guts to tell Jesus to shut up and it's time to quit. The disciples even came up with a plan. They said, "Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." Now, by this point, the people had missed several meals and they were probably hungry. They weren't complaining, but the disciples were sensitive to their hunger. So they said, "Send them away to get food." Like Jesus, the disciples saw the crowd. See, seeing the crowd isn't very hard, is it? Most of us can do that part. But the disciples not only saw the crowd, they took the next step and they realized the need. The people were hungry. Most people can also see the need. And in fact, churches are full of people who can see needs but don't want to do anything about it. You know those kind of people, don't you? They talk about what we need, but they don't want to be a part of the solution. The disciples saw the need and they realized it, but the disciples didn't feel compassion towards the people. Why? They saw the need, but they didn't want to meet it. Here's why. They felt overwhelmed. There was no way that they could possibly feed all the people. So the best option was to send them away. And because the disciples felt overwhelmed, rather than feeling compassion, their solution was to get rid of the people. Have you ever felt that way? You've seen an overwhelming need and you inventory your resources and you decide, I am powerless to fix this, so I don't want to be around this need anymore. Maybe you've heard the statistics or you've seen an infomercial. You've heard me talk about how many children in the world don't have a meal today. You look at the pictures for a moment, but the need is so overwhelming that you quickly change channels. You say, I need to put some distance between myself and this need. It's just too painful and too frustrating to think about. See, that's the typical response when you see a need that's bigger than your resources. The disciples said, send them away, but Jesus said, you give them something to eat. Notice here that the emphasis is on you. Don't send them away. You observe the need. You realized it. Now you give them something to eat. They said to Jesus, that would take 8 months of a man's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? Even if we could afford it, which we can't, where are we going to find that much food on short notice? How are we supposed to give them something to eat? And Jesus asked him a very simple question. How many loaves do you have? See, that is a key question in this story. I know the need is overwhelming. I know that you don't feel qualified or are able to make a difference. But what do you have? Instead of focusing on you, how you can't make a difference, change the focus. What have you got? Figure it out. See, God's church has been built on this pattern, seeing needs and reaching out to fill them with a total dependence on God. See, anything of substance that moves God's kingdom forward happens because God's people open their eyes, they see needs around them, and then they say, God, use me. How many loaves do you have? Jesus asked. Go and see. Now, it must have been an amazing scene as the disciples went through the huge crowd looking for food. And John chapter 6 tells us more of the story. Andrew, Simon, Peter's brother, spoke up. He said, here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 fish. When I read this, I wonder, did the boy volunteer his lunch? Did the disciples have to talk him into giving it? Did they bribe him? Or did they threaten him? How did the lunch get from the little boy's hands into the disciples' hands? See, it's a blessing to grow up in church, but this is one story that you're probably better off if you didn't grow up in church and you started attending as an adult, because the version that you saw as a kid kind of messed up the story a bit. See, the pictures that we colored in Sunday school coloring sheets depicted this miracle in a very inaccurate way. Right? You saw a typical little boy with a massive lunch, right? The bread looked like massive French loaves that were huge. The fish looked like 2 blue marlins that someone had taken down off of their fireplace and had brought. See, that's the picture that we got growing up. This little boy brought 2 trophy fish and 5 giant loaves of bread. And there was so much food that he had to bring a cart to wheel it all to Jesus. See, Jesus was going to have to feed a lot of people And so the coloring sheet illustrators decided to help him out a little bit. But see, it was going to take a miracle anyways, so we might as well get it right. This was one boy's lunch. They were most likely 5 little barley loaves, about that big. At most, they're 1 or 2 bites each. It's a little bit smaller than a biscuit. He had 5 of them. If I said I was going to feed you lunch today and I showed up with this and said, hey, thanks for coming to lunch, you guys would be looking at me going, Pastor, you are crazy. You have lost your mind. Where's the food? Somebody take Pastor's credit card, go get some Little Caesars, and let's get some $5 pizzas, right? The fish weren't like fish that you'd want to eat. They were probably more like sardines, which are disgusting. Remember, there was no refrigeration back then, and so the fish were smoked and they were cured in salt, and they taste nasty. Anybody in here like sardines? I don't know how. Here's the thing. The little boy's lunch was the equivalent of a McDonald's Happy Meal. Anybody love Happy Meals? Anybody's kids love Happy Meals? My kids love Happy Meals. They're like, Mom, Dad, let's go get Happy Meals. And I'm like, dude, you're going to get 4 nuggets, like 3 fries, and some apples if you're lucky, if they remember to put them in there, right? Here's the problem. Grown people can't eat just a McDonald's Happy Meal lunch. If you do, you're hungry. Like, if this is what I'm having for a meal, I need like 3 or 4 of these. So can you imagine 5,000 men trying to do that? For some reason, the little boy still had his lunch. Maybe his mom packed stuff that he didn't like. So even though the boy was hungry, he hadn't eaten it. He had 5 loaves and 2 fish. See, when you see a need, and especially when the need is massive, your response is often the same as the original followers of Jesus. You look at the size of the need and you take a personal inventory. You realize that you almost always come up short, and you say, the need is too big for what I've got. How am I going to make a difference? I just don't have what it takes. The need is overwhelming. Jesus says, stop telling me what you don't have. Instead, start telling me what you do have. What's in your lunchbox? This isn't my lunchbox, by the way. This is my daughter's. It says, bows are superpowers. Or have superpowers. I don't know. I can't read. But what's in your lunchbox? In June of 2020, in the midst of the pandemic, we had an amazing opportunity to rescue women and children out of sexual slavery in India. Businesses had slowed down because of the pandemic restrictions, and brothels were releasing women and children to go back to their homes. But the problem was these women and children needed health care and job training in order to be independent. The need was enormous. There was no way that any of us could even could begin to take care of them on our own. But many of you opened up your lunchbox and you gave. And together we provided the future for 250 women and their children. During the last year, we gave out over 1,500 bags of groceries to people who were in need. Did that solve the hunger problem in our community? No. But because of the size of those bags of groceries, that's over 6,000 times that people who were hungry got to eat. See, we spend too much time looking into other people's lunchboxes. We did this as kids. Hey, what do you got? I will trade you my Jell-O for an apple. Nobody would ever make that trade. Usually as if you had an apple or carrots, you were trying to get somebody else's Jell-O or pudding. But we still do that as adults. I listen to a great preacher and I think, man, I sure would like to communicate like that. I'm never going to measure up. You say, well, I'm not much of a teacher. I'm not good at it, but I'm a good listener, but I am a terrible talker. Jesus answers, wait, what did you just say? You're a good listener? What about pastoral care ministry? You don't need to be a good talker to be able to visit people in nursing homes. You just need to be a good listener. There you go. You've got it. You just discovered something that was in your lunchbox. Somebody else says, well, you know what? I am not a people person, but I love working with computers and technical stuff. Do you have any idea how many people it takes that are working behind the scenes in order to make this service happen, both in person and online? We have room for people to run soundboards and cameras and switchers and screens. Right now, Keith is the only one that has been willing to do it, and it is way too much for one person. There are people that are behind the scenes checking in kids and nursery and inputting data, and I could go on and on. Those people don't want to be up in front of the crowd or behind a microphone. They've got a totally different gift mix. We have people who love being people, and peopling. We need you to serve as greeters and ushers. If you sing or play an instrument, we need you to be on the worship team. Listen, we don't all have the same talents, but we all have something that we can do. We all have something in our lunchbox. At some point along the way, we've got to say, Lord, here's what I have. Can you use this to minister to people? See, that's the feel of the passage. Jesus said, hey, what do you have? Look in your lunchbox. Let's see what's there. Listen to me, your resources will never be enough to reach all the needs around us. Jesus simply wants us to offer what we have to him. I guarantee you the disciples had to wonder if the little boy's lunch would even make a difference. Regardless, Andrew brought it to Jesus, and Jesus did something amazing. Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass, and so they sat down the groups in hundreds and fifties. Jesus said, all right, guys, get them all seated, organize them into groups. We're going to serve a meal. Hold up, Jesus. Remember, all we've got is a Happy Meal. And there are thousands of people here. If we tell them that we're going to feed them lunch and all we got is a Happy Meal, we're going to have a riot on our hands. Here's a better plan. Let's go send them away. Or let's go find food first and then we'll tell them that we'll feed them. There's no reason to get their hopes up. So Jesus, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and he broke the loaves. And then he gave them to his disciples to set before the people. He divided the 2 fish among them all. Listen to this verse. They all ate and were satisfied. So see, Jesus took the little boy's lunch. He blessed it. He multiplied it. And then he fed the people. Not just some of the people, all the people. Somewhere between 10 and 15,000 people ate from one little lunch. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000, plus the women and the children. See, the one person we haven't really talked about much is the little boy. Regardless of how enthusiastic he was about giving away his lunch, he did it. He responded generously when someone came to him and said, hey, Jesus needs what you have. Maybe he thought that Jesus was hungry and he gave his lunch for him. Who knows? But the point is the little boy gave all that he had. Despite everybody else being overwhelmed by the need, one little boy said it's not much, but if Jesus wants it, then he can have it all. And when he gave his little bit to Jesus, it was the seed for a miracle. My question for you is, what's in your lunchbox? I'm not asking about the size of the need. What do you have to give? What are you willing to do? How can you step out and step up? Maybe you're not sure what's in your lunchbox or how it could even be useful. Listen, stop by the welcome table after service. We've got our ministry match things out there that have every single position that you can serve. We'll help find you somewhere to serve that matches your ministry gifts. Because the reality is, every single one of us that attends should be serving somewhere. Let me ask it another way. What have you been keeping because the need seems too overwhelming? Maybe it's your time. Maybe it's your money. Energy. Could be talent or passion or love. Jesus said, what have you got? Let's see if we can use it. Are you willing to give what you have? See, when you do, you'll watch Jesus multiply it in amazing ways for the kingdom. A short time later, a very similar need presented itself. It's a story that you might not have heard. The story is found in Mark chapter 8. During those days, another large crowd gathered. Since they had had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to them and said, I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way because some of them have come a long distance. Big crowd, big overwhelming need, same disciples, same Jesus, but on a different hillside. His disciples answered, but we're in the middle of a remote place. Where can we get bread enough to feed them? Are you kidding me? Did the disciples forget about what had just happened a short time before that? They asked the same question to him. And Jesus said, how many loaves do you have? It was the same question that Jesus asked. But this time, their answer was different. They said, hey, we've got 7. See, the disciples didn't bring enough for the whole crowd, but this time they brought something. They weren't going to be empty-handed again, and they had already seen what Jesus could do with a little. See, too often we want to do miracles with other people's sacrifices. I get that. Imagine the following scenario. Somebody comes to me and says, hey, I've got a really great idea for a ministry. If you'll just give me $10,000, I'll go for it. So I ask, well, what are you doing now? And their response is, well, I'm not doing anything yet, but if you'll give me the money, I will. Here's the problem. They're not doing anything with what they have. They've given nothing. They have made no sacrifice. They're ready to be in ministry and meet needs, but they're not ready to personally be willing to sacrifice to see it happen. This time, the disciples were prepared. Their sacrifice would be a seed for a miracle. And so they gave the bread to Jesus, and he told the crowd to sit down on the ground. And when he had taken the 7 loaves and given thanks, he broke it and gave them to the disciples and set them before the people. And they did so. They had a few small fish as well. See, they saw what Jesus had done with the little boy's lunch, and they brought almost the exact same thing. They had 7 loaves and 2 fish. So what did Jesus do? He gave thanks for them also and told the disciples to distribute them. The people ate and they were satisfied. And afterwards, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. And about 4,000 men were present that day. With women and children, there were probably about 10,000 people fed that day with one simple picnic lunch. See, the disciples prepared for the miracle. They sacrificed what they had, and they saw Jesus use it in a miracle. Here's the lesson from the 2 picnic lunches. Jesus can do a lot with a little. But what he does do is he asks us for our willingness to give what we have. your sacrifice in his hands equals a miracle.